You feel it, don't you? Yeah, I see it in the way you carry yourself now. Something shifted, something settled, like someone who finally stopped waiting for permission to trust what they already knew. They're sitting somewhere right now, rehearsing casual, practicing normal, hoping their performance is convincing enough that you never connect what you've already connected. But here's what's slowly unraveling them from the inside. You already know. Not because someone handed you the truth, not because you caught them in some obvious moment, but because deception has a texture, and somewhere along the way, you learned to feel it before you could even name it. Let me describe something that's probably sitting heavy in your chest with recognition. For months, maybe longer, you felt it. That quiet change in the atmosphere when you entered a room. The way conversations would reorganize themselves mid-sentence, like people shuffling papers they didn't want you to read. The way certain eyes started doing that thing where they'd land on you and then skate away too quickly. Not guilt, exactly. Guilt requires a conscience. But something closer to exposure, the discomfort of being near the very person your betrayal was built around. They turned your name into something they passed around, spending it in rooms and conversations you were never meant to hear about, thinking the whole transaction was invisible. But you dangerous, perceptive thing. You learned to trace the money without ever seeing the receipt. Every rehearsed smile was a confession. Every compliment that came in just slightly too strong was an admission. Every time they asked how you were doing with that hollow warmth in their voice, they were really asking something else entirely. Do you know yet? Have you started to see it? Have you pulled enough threads to unravel what we thought we buried deep enough? And you let them wonder. You let them live inside that uncertainty, while you quietly, methodically, collected everything they carelessly left behind. They needed you confused. They needed you doubting the very instincts that were screaming at you from every direction. That's what people do when the truth becoming visible is a threat to them. They work to make you a stranger to your own perception. But something happened that they never built into their plan. Your intuition didn't break under the pressure. It transformed. It sharpened into something precise, something that didn't just sense dishonesty, but could identify its shape 3 conversations before it showed its face. The almost funny part, the part that's equal amounts tragic and predictable, is watching how they move now. Careful, measured, like people tiptoeing through a room they wired themselves, trying to remember exactly where they placed everything dangerous. They're watching you watch them, and it's making them come apart quietly, because they cannot determine what you know, what you've pieced together, what you've already decided. They miscalculated you so completely it borders on embarrassing. They saw your patience and called it obliviousness. They saw your kindness and called it naivety. They saw your silence and filed it under ignorance. Every single interpretation, wrong. You want to know what they said. Of course you do. Not because you need it confirmed. You're far beyond needing confirmation now, but because there's something grounding about hearing spoken what you decoded in silence, long before anyone offered it to you. They called you difficult. They called you dramatic. They said you were someone who couldn't be trusted, which would almost be worth laughing at if it didn't come from people who constructed entire alternate versions of you to share with whoever would listen. They called you too much, and somehow, in the same breath, not enough. They positioned you as the disruption because naming themselves the source of the poison would require a level of self-honesty they've been running from their entire lives. In late-night phone calls and quiet corners of group chats, they took you apart like they had authority over what you were made of. Except real authority comes with accountability, and these people only had time and unresolved bitterness. Everything you did became evidence in a case they were building against you. You spoke up, that was aggression. You went quiet, that was manipulation. You thrived, that was performance. You struggled, that was justice. There was never a version of you that could have satisfied the narrative, because the narrative was never really about you. It was about what tearing you down did for them. They constructed stories about you, with just enough truth threaded through them to make the rest sound credible. That's the particular cruelty of it. They didn't invent you from scratch. They took real moments, real interactions, things that actually happened, and then they bent them. They removed context that would have reflected badly on themselves. They added implications that never existed. They seasoned it all with suggestion and served it warm to people who were already looking for reasons to believe the worst about you. Because believing the worst about you meant they didn't have to sit with the worst about themselves. And they didn't stop at strangers. That would have been too easy, too distant. They went to the people close to you. They planted things in gardens you thought were protected, whispering a version of you into ears you believed were safe. Some of those people held firm, but some of them tilted. And that's the kind of betrayal that lands differently, isn't it? It's not the enemy who comes at you openly. You expect that. It's the ones who were standing beside you, who simply stepped back and let it happen. They said you were changing, and they weren't entirely wrong. You were changing. You were moving past the version of yourself that had learned to absorb disrespect and call it loyalty. You were outgrowing the boundaries of their comfort, and that terrified them. Because your growth didn't just leave them behind. It illuminated exactly how still they were standing. So they reframed it. Your evolution became corruption. Your clarity became arrogance. Your limits became cruelty. If they could convince enough people, maybe even you, that what was actually expansion was actually damage, maybe you'd compress yourself back down to a size that made them feel less small. But here's what they fundamentally misread about you, and this is exactly where their whole architecture started silently failing. You don't just feel things and set them down. You're a collector, not of grudges. That's too obvious, too ordinary. You collect patterns. You collect the moments that don't line up. You collect the small inconsistencies and file them somewhere that never powers down, never stops cross-referencing, never stops quietly assembling what they believed was too scattered to ever form a complete picture. Every interaction that felt rehearsed, noted. Every exclusion that didn't quite make sense, remembered. Every piece of information that contradicted something said before, stored. You weren't paranoid. You were paying attention. There's a distance between those two things that only people who've been forced to protect themselves from sustained psychological misdirection ever fully understand. They got sloppy. That's what always happens when people mistake their own cleverness for something more than it is. They lost track of which version they'd told to which person. Person A received one story. Person B received another. Person C got something different altogether. And when those people eventually spoke to each other, which they always eventually do, the contradictions began compounding. But your account never shifted, because it didn't need to. Truth doesn't require multiple drafts. Truth doesn't get adjusted based on who's in the room. You started catching the things they assumed would fly past you. The way certain topics surfaced in conversation that only made sense if your life had been the subject of a discussion you weren't invited to. The way they'd reference details they had no direct access to. The way someone would accidentally reveal knowledge of a situation they had no right to know about, and then scramble to recover, hoping you hadn't registered the slip. But you registered everything. You always did. Kindness and inattention are not the same thing. Mistaking one for the other was their most costly error. Then came the confirmations. Not all at once, gradually, because not everyone could sustain the lie indefinitely. Some people have a conscience that eventually overrides their fear. Some people watched you continuing to build your life and couldn't keep carrying what they'd been part of. They came to you separately, cautiously, with the details. What was said, who said it, when, where. They thought they were delivering a revelation. They didn't realize they were simply confirming an answer you'd already reached on your own. You let them finish. You let them believe they were the ones who told you. And then you did something that separated you entirely from everyone who's ever been betrayed and reacted immediately. You didn't surface it. You didn't confront. You didn't let them see even a fraction of what you now knew. You did something that required far more composure and far more intelligence. You let them believe they were still undetected. You remained civil, steady, unrevealing, while internally you had already begun the quiet work of removing them from the architecture of your life. This nearly destroyed them. You could see it if you were watching closely. The way they'd push slightly, testing for a reaction. The way they'd glance at your face when certain subjects came up, searching for any signal that you'd heard, that you'd found out, that the whole structure was visible to you now, but you gave them nothing. Composed, calm, impenetrable. Because you had learned something they will never understand. Silence isn't absence. Silence is architecture. Silence is the space you move through freely while they remain trapped in the noise of their own making. You continued building. You kept showing up for your own life like none of it had any real weight, and in the truest sense, it didn't. Their version of you had no power over the actual you. Every milestone you reached was a direct, wordless argument against everything they'd been circulating. Every level you arrived at made their narrative sound increasingly absurd to anyone paying attention. Meanwhile, they remained where they were, rotating through the same behaviors, the same cycles, the same patterns they had assigned to you. Still talking about you in some cases, months or years later, because without you as a subject, they lose the thread of their own story. They're like a performance running in an empty theater, hitting every mark, delivering every line, with no one left in the seats. Their relationships are quietly deteriorating. You cannot build anything with real foundations out of betrayal and performance. The people they recruited against you, some of them are beginning to see the shape of it. Some of them are noticing that the obsession never faded, and finding that more revealing than anything you ever had to say directly. You became unreachable. Not through aggression, not through exposure, not through any kind of retaliation, though you had everything you needed to do real damage, and they are fully aware of that. You became unreachable by arriving at a place of such genuine disinterest in their existence that they stopped registering as a variable in any decision you made. They're not enemies. They're not even a complication. They're simply people you once knew, who showed you exactly who they were at the moment it mattered most. And you showed yourself exactly who you are. The contrast doesn't need commentary. Here's what's happening to them now, and this is where the story turns. They assumed that getting away with it meant they could rest, that your silence meant they'd won. That was the final miscalculation in a long sequence of them. Your not knowing would have given them peace. Your not knowing would have let them close their eyes without incident. But you knowing and choosing not to say it, that's a different kind of weight entirely, one they don't have the tools to set down. They replay things now, conversations, moments, things you said that might have been layered, looks you gave that might have meant something. They're haunted by the probability that you were always ahead of them, watching their entire performance from a vantage point they never detected. The paranoia that's eating at them now is the most poetic thing about all of this. They dissect things you post. They interpret your success as a message aimed directly at them. They see your happiness and convince themselves it's constructed, designed to make them feel the absence of their damage. They've projected onto you for so long that they can no longer tell the difference between your actual life and their guilty conscience reading patterns into it. You've become a mirror they can't stop walking past, showing them everything they worked hardest to keep hidden. Let's talk about what you actually gained from moving through this. Because what they put you through, as costly and painful as it was, handed you an education you couldn't have bought and wouldn't trade now. You learned that how people treat you is almost never actually about you. It's about what's unresolved inside them, what they're running from, what they can't look at directly. Hurt people find targets. Insecure people find mirrors to crack. People who have never confronted what's broken in themselves will always try to locate that brokenness somewhere outside. This wasn't about you. It used you. But it was never about you. You learn to trust yourself with a ferocity that has no apology in it. Before this, you might have rationalized yourself out of your own instincts. You might have softened what you were sensing to avoid seeming unfair. You don't do that anymore. That feeling in your body when something is wrong, that's not anxiety, that's data. That's thousands of micro-observations your subconscious processed before your conscious mind arrived at the same address. You listen now. You act accordingly. You don't wait for external confirmation of what your interior already knows. You learn that access to you is not a given, that your time, your trust, your presence, your energy are things with actual value that belong in the hands of people who've demonstrated they'll handle them with care. You can be warm from a distance. You can genuinely wish someone well without giving them proximity. Limits aren't punishment. Limits are precision. You learned who was real. The ones who stood firm when the narrative came for you. The ones who didn't need the full story because they already knew your character. The ones defending you in conversations you'll never hear about, simply because that's what integrity looks like in practice. Those people, you know exactly who they are now. Everyone else was always a supporting character who exited at the right moment for everyone involved. You learned that becoming the person they tried to prevent you from becoming is the only response that ever mattered. Not confrontation, not exposure, not the satisfaction of watching them react. Just growth. Just relentless, unglamorous, consistent forward motion. Your peace is the answer. Your stability is the answer. Your complete, settled, undisturbed life is the answer. They wanted you fractured. You became something they don't have a word for. Here's what's ahead, and they already sense it coming. You're going to keep building. Not because you're trying to make a point to anyone. You released that need a long time ago, somewhere quiet, without announcement. But because forward is simply the direction you move. And there will come a point, maybe it's already visible from where you're standing, where this entire chapter feels like something that happened to someone adjacent to you. The pain will remain real. The lessons will remain useful. But the people will shrink in the distance until they're nearly impossible to locate in the frame. That's what they fear most. Not that you'll expose them, not that you'll retaliate, but that you'll forget. That you'll move so completely beyond all of it that reconstructing their names in your memory will require actual effort. That you'll have built so much, become so established, arrived at such a settled and visible life, that even the people who believed what they were told will have to sit with the dissonance of what they heard versus what they can plainly see. And deeper than that, they're afraid you'll tell your story, not to destroy anything, not to settle anything, but simply because your truth is yours to speak, and it has the particular power of resonating with people still trapped inside the same kind of slow psychological erosion they tried to keep you in. Your voice, the real one, not the character they authored, is something they built no defense against. But what they are most afraid of, the thing that sits underneath all the rest of it, is that you'll forgive them. Not in the way that opens a door. Some doors stay closed, and that is not cruelty, that is wisdom. But in the way where you put down the weight of it permanently, where you stop carrying the record of what they did as something that belongs in your body, where you decide that the lesson closed, that you extracted everything useful from it, and that everyone involved in teaching it has served their purpose in your story, and can now simply be released. That forgiveness, that final, quiet act of freeing yourself from the entire thing, that is the move they never saw coming, the one they have no response to, the one that ends the game entirely, on your terms, in your time, completely.